morning from Boston to everyone. Many thanks to you for joining us to share some thoughts and ideas with some extraordinary people on the recent work of Samuel Bak entitled The Question of Life. Those of you that we can actually look at the cover of the catalog to realize that Sam has very clearly emphasized that the word if is somehow tucked in between the L and the E. And that notion of conditionality certainly has framed all of our lives. What is possible? What if this will happen? What if that will happen? And how some of those things play out. Sometimes we participate in making choices and then are responsible for them. And sometimes much is imposed upon us that's well outside our control. So one of the joys of always having an opportunity to show Sam's work, some 58 years now, but also to have an opportunity to share with you his perspective, that of Alex Cardon from the University of Nebraska, who's the chief curator of the Bach Museum, Rusty Herbert. There's a whole bunch of us, Caroline Zoller, who's worked on these WebinARTs for some time. And so I've asked everyone, and probably left somebody out, but asked everyone to be prepared to discuss individual works as we go along. So if we can begin with the first slide, and this is what I was referring to in terms of design. Sam uses the word if sometimes in a very different way, but graphically. But I think the notion of the if is present in all of our lives, and this is a wonderful opportunity to begin to explore questions around that. So if we can look at this painting and ask Sam if you would begin with some of your ramblings about this particular image of hope and love.
This painting is almost one of the last works that I have done, and it's wonderful to begin with that because it really speaks of life, which is there, then the things that come with them that are kind of acquired, the capacity to love. There is love, and above all, hope which is somehow very much suspended and which is sometimes fleeting. And what is also very important for me with this specific work, that it was created digitally and then printed out. And in this exhibition, there are many works on paper that have been created in this way. For me, at the age of close to 90, discover the possibility of working digitally was like for my great-grandfather to discover the existence of the radio. It was a fantastic possibility to work with the most up-to-date possibilities of technique. And I'm very proud that I was able to handle it. And I'm very happy to have it in the beginning of our conversation.
Lovely. Alex, I would love for you, sorry about the word, to respond to this particular piece and also to think about what Sam said in terms of his not only willingness, but ability to engage with the latest technology because his worldview is so solid that no matter what he approaches, no matter what technique it is, it still is reflected in what he creates.
But yeah, I think it is fantastic for anyone to take on a new medium at any age. What's great about it is I can tell the students about it here, the art students, and they're absolutely in awe because it is something that they have a hard time mastering. And so when I'm showing them these digital images, they're like, oh my God, these are so beautiful and incredible. And if I could get to that scale. It's a fantastic medium to in which Sam has translated his abilities as a painter, as a someone who builds these scenes up, and you see the exploration of a new technique, which is always exciting. And I also like how Sam prints these out and then retouches them, so they really become a unique piece in so many ways because you can't recreate that either. this piece, even though it doesn't have an if, when I'm looking at it, there's still this question of if there's love, if there's hope. And you get this move from something that's heavy, from these stone letters that he's beautifully rendered, up into hope that's flying away. And all that energy that you see in Sam's painting, he translates really beautifully in the digital media by these sort of featherings of colors, where you have this sweep moving sideways, and you get the sense of this wind, and almost like that wish for hope. When you just blow out something, and send your wishes for hope to others, as you think of them. So there's something so lovely here, because if we think about the piece as the last piece of a series, when Sam's working, it's on multiple pieces at a time. And so you get this idea of meditation across canvases. So to have this be the last piece is so generous and so reflective of how Sam speaks of his work, always leaving you with a note, even if it's dark humor, of laughter. So it's a great piece to start with in my mind today, as we dive backwards into the series.
Rusty, you've known Sam's work for probably close to 40 years. And when you first saw it and engaged with it, would you have anticipated Sam's capacity to embrace these two words of hope and of love based upon the earlier pieces that you saw?
Well, the early pieces I saw are much of what drew me to you, Bernie. I saw Sam's work in your gallery, and I had to come back and look at Sam's work multiple times because I was completely captured by what he was presenting to me, and I was relatively uneducated about art techniques. I was a physician, so it was very different for me. Anticipating words was certainly not something that I would have looked at and thought about early on in Sam's work. But as I've gotten to know Sam and his work, it is integral in so many ways to an interpretation. And there is not one interpretation. You look at this piece and there is life, LIFE there is an if, but it's covered up by love. And the hope is ascending, and so we'll see there's more of these words that are, because the whole series is about the word life, and we'll see more of this, but the juxtaposition of the words allows you to think in many different ways, which is what Sam's just a master at. They're questions, they're not answers. This doesn't say love conquers life. It's just, in this particular painting, it seems to be on the surface of it. On another situation, life might be sitting on top of love, and is it squishing it? So by using words, it's a little bit like visual poetry in some ways. Once you juxtapose two words, there's always another interpretation potentially there. And in this case, it just happens to be visual. But the way Sam's paintings affected me early on is the same. They were visual icons, whatever it may have been that Sam was painting at the time, whether it was candles or whether it was the Sistine Chapel, whatever it was, there were always things juxtaposed that made you say, what is that and why is that? And the words here continue that process. So they're very much in line with how I feel about Sam's work, just more specific in terms of the literal presentation.
Sam, in the early works, and I'm going back to 1967, 68, 69, and we were showing works that you had just begun to work in this style of recognizable objects and recognizable questions. How would you characterize your own journey to be able to emphasize clearly not only the conditionality of life, but notions of love and hope, which from my perspective were not as present then as they are now?
Well, I think when you look back at your life at the age of 92, everything looks very different and clearer and maybe you look at it with much more forgiveness and maybe even courage to speak about it. So there is a factor of age. But I must say that today I had a look on the catalogues on the work that I did in 65. And there is a huge number of drawings with dice, with things that look like letters. And so everything was already there. Everything was already there, but it was just waiting. It is waiting. It's like sometimes you remember when I went to a dentist, I had to wait a very long time. By the time I arrived to the dentist, it didn't hurt anymore. But I had to wait for that, and it came in the right time.
It came in a quite beautiful time, I think, in so many ways, because when people used to come in the gallery, now I'm talking 1972, 74, 76, they would say specifically, where's the hope in Mr. Bach's work?
Yeah,
And that's when you did an entire series of works with the word hope in it. And then
right.
I could say, well, here's the word hope. Uh, but there's a quote of Brother Thomas's that I like very much, and it relates specifically, I think, to this. The only antidote to hopelessness is hope itself.
Yeah,
And I think that you now, and the past decade at least, have continued to emphasize the critical importance of hope itself in order to nourish and provide one's survival. So
yes.
we'll come back to this later
Yeah,
because
we should go back to the further things. But what I want to say, what I think is important when you look at my work, is it tries to give a certain perspective to things which are kind of public domain. And in order to give perspective, there is a certain dimension of irony, because irony is a very good carrier of perspectives on things. So there is some irony in these floating letters, in these built letters, in these stable letters. When you look sometimes at old movies, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, they were built with words built like architectures, perfect golden architectures. Here everything crumbles in my paintings. So there is a certain degree of irony of things that we take for granted that are part of dream, but actually we had no choice. We had no choice to arrive, to be born in this world at a certain place, at a certain time, and so on. And then there's things that we could create, like the addition of O and the V. The L and the E were already there. So it became love. And then it was not enough. We needed something that to float above all this, to bring us a little higher to a different dimension. And this is the hope that is here. So all these things were always in my paintings. I think so. The flying trees, the flying rainbows.
Yeah, I would just point out before we move on that the beginning, the left side of the L as we're looking at it, also somewhat reminiscent of a crematoria chimney. So we can
Yes,
move on now
yes,
with a
absolutely,
little sense of
absolutely.
the past.
And the Vav of the Vilna in the two black lines, dark lines that are there
On
on
the
the left.
left-hand side, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that also suggests Jacob's ladder. There's a whole uh, lexicon as life according to Samuel Bak. We're moving on to In Quest of a Balance. And Alex, if you'd like to provide us with your perspective on this piece.
Yeah, they Sam brought up the presence of the rainbow as hope. And a lot of the conversation within his paintings is pulling out that hope and allowing for the viewer to not sort of only reside in the darkness of the conversation and build up from there and envision very much what futures are possible. And here you get that sense of life as these moments of decision where you have this river that's divided and can take you in different directions. And so, you have this wonderful placidity here to the river through Sam's paint technique, where it's almost like a mirror that's reflecting. And that contrasts so much when I look at the movement of paint and the nature that seems far wilder. And so you sort of have these two different directions almost, different ways that life can affect you. That seem to sort of jump out at the viewer as they look at the textures that are used to create this landscape. But when I'm thinking about these letters in many ways, I also think about the Hollywood sign, that promise that the Hollywood sign gives you with these letters that are fixed in this landscape, all the dream that comes with it. And there's something similar here where you have this dream through the letters of a life, and what does a life mean, and how a life is constructed through a series of experiences. And as you go through these experiences, your life becomes an accumulation of objects that you pull together in order to find meaning for yourself. Like another person's perspective on your life might be completely different. And so from the outside, they might associate symbols and letters to you that are vastly different than this construction. So, there's this desire to create almost through these accumulations a self-portrait and a narrative that people can come to and interpret in different ways. I mean, there's these fantastic, we have a half and half cup in the collection of the museum, and everyone who comes to it is coming from their moment in time and saying half full, half empty. And this, it's a very playful painting in so many ways because the cup is cut in half, and the water is in half, half full, half empty on one side. And so it sort of throws back at you this idea of hopefulness and how you construct the future that you desire with a desired for an anticipated outcome, but that dice right in the middle is like this strong reminder that you don't actually have a lot of say in your future. That we give ourselves these great plans because we worry about our futures, but the reality of them happening is dependent on so many other factors, and we have to be comfortable and secure in that state of uncertainty in so many ways. So, I look at this with a lot of trepidation too.
Well, as Sam indicates in the title, it's in quest of balance. And I think that people would often like to describe themselves as their life is in balance, but this certainly, as a structure, seems somewhat tenuous to say the least. Caroline, your thoughts about this piece?
Well, excuse me. What I love about this is, and about, especially in this series, I see it a lot in all of Sam's work, that he has a material language that he uses to reveal the spiritual. So when I see these, it's it's like this quest between the life that's lived, and these are the cards you're given. Someone has clearly would have come into this space and created this sculpture and with the pieces they've been given, and it's what you take from that really that this piece specifically speaks most loudly.
I love that notion of the material language for the spiritual. Rusty?
Well, just to throw in a few of the special Bakian icons, the die is obviously one of them, and obviously things are very precariously balanced on that dice. The roll of the dice plays such a big part in if, right? IF. The I's got a little cross hatched to it. You could look at that as a cross. You could look at it as an X. An X in Sam's language often represents non-viability, death. You look at the E, and E is what everything rests on, and E is where we end up. E stands for end in a lot of these paintings. It's structurally the most foundational, but it's also very weak, and obviously could crumble at any time. The pieces of the rainbow, again, a reference to the covenant between people, God, destruction that happens on earth. So all of these are elements that feed into our ability to emotionally engage with this and create that atmosphere that everyone refers to that is unsettling at best. We'll see in many of these paintings, especially these life paintings, flowing of river or water and things into the distance, which I will steal from Sam is probably his 92 years of flow, long life. He's lived a very long time. But then there's that little short piece of water over there on the left. You might not make it so far. You might make it a little ways and you don't get to the distance. So all of that's encompassed in here. But I would feel remiss if I didn't say how beautiful the coloration of some of this is. That's independent of maybe what meaning is there. And I think Sam talks more about drawing people into his paintings so they will engage, so they will look at these, ask questions. But the beauty of his color is really phenomenal.
All important and worthwhile things. Sam, I'm not even going to ask you to respond, but we'll go to the next piece, please. And here we are, so to speak, in the sky, where from time to time, Sam creates these fairy tale-like cities on a hill, on a mountain, in the distance. In many ways, it's almost the cap of a pear shape that he uses. And sort of visually, if you would allow yourself, you could encircle the word life and if, as if it were deconstructed interior part of a pear. Pear being a symbol clearly in Sam's vocabulary of a generative force and of life itself. So enough of me, and I'm going to ask Sam again if you would begin to guide us in your process of creating this. I forgot about the blackbird. Your turn.
Yeah, my turn. First of all, let me thank all the participants here of speaking so beautiful of my work. It certainly is an enormous pleasure to feel that so much comes back to me. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. In this specific painting, of course, the hope instead of the rainbow, there is the castle in the sky. Yet it could be a reality. It is not only an imagination because it is somehow fixed and upheld by some beams that keep it standing there. So actually, the only one that can move here away is the bird. It is the only thing that can move away. All the rest is connected, interconnected, interwoven. And in order to give to the viewer a sense of stability when he looks at the painting, I needed a triangle, which I created by these three spheres. The sphere over the eye, the blue sphere, the sphere on the ground, and the sphere enclosed in the E. And these three spheres, they anchor all the elements of the painting. So I'm just giving you a little of the secrets of the shop of thinking in terms of composition, because very often meanings of my paintings are born from my need to create shapes that allow a compositional balance.
Yeah.
So this is how, for instance, the one castle, which is partly in there, partly not, echoes with a further castle indicated on the right of the painting. So all these things happen also simply because of the visual need to listen to a painting, to hear the rhythms of the shapes, to increase the crescendo of colors and so on. So it's very difficult to speak with a verbal means about images.
Correct, but speak a little bit about oil on black canvas. Because normally we just have plain old oil on canvas. So
Yeah,
did you?
oil on canvas. My friend Jossel Berner, an older painter who died a couple of years ago, was said, it's a pity people don't like works on paper. They like painting. They like art, which is in Yiddish geprägelte Malerei. Geprägelt means Bernie. Do you know what geprägelt means? No.
No, even my bubby didn't use that word.
Sauté in French.
Cooked,
How do you translate sauté?
sort of
When
lightly
you
cooked.
when you put things into boiling oil.
I
Yes,
see.
fried.
Yeah. So this is what people prefer to instead of vegetarian regime, they prefer things thrown into oil. Well, oil is a wonderful means. Today, oil has been improved by the addition of macrocellular elements. So in the oil of today, there are many acrylic elements, and they allow the oil when it dries to remain a little more elastic, which means that the cracking that painters once knew and that provided work to restorers of museums for centuries is now not anymore happening as it used to happen in the past, because of all these innovative things that so far so good.
It's sort of uncracked. Alex, your thoughts about this piece?
Well, I'm so happy that Sam brought up the triangle and the spheres because what marked me about this is the same thing that marked me about a work that we have in our collection called In the Frame, where you have these elements of still life sitting in front of a frame as it's busting out, and here we have this if that's breaking out of this box, out of the frame. Right now, we're in this moment where we want everything to fit in neatly. We're being told that history is only one way. And there's only one correct interpretation of history. And so everything's being put into these little categories that make some people feel very comfortable with life. They see history as something that is easily understood. And so when we reflect upon the past and we start thinking of individual narratives and how everything's being locked away, and we're ignoring the experiences of individual, this if breaking out. When I first looked at the painting, it was like this rebellion against single interpretations, single meanings. And then the castle in the background, that sort of floating but anchored, gives you that sense of uncertainty. The painting asks you to suspend your disbelief, so because they're all comfortable elements that you can recognize and you can attribute all these meanings to them. But there's always that if at the center that's questioning whether or not your understanding of this reality is actually correct. And it emphasizes the instability of the L from life, and then the balance of the sphere within the E. And so it's such a you get sort of a little rebel Sam here, saying, "I'm going to break out of these forms. I'm going to push against and show that uncertainty that destabilizes us so much."
Thank you for reminding me to indicate that a number of the either catalogs, documentaries, and so forth have always been titled Samuel Bak, Painter of Questions. And so I think that if we, as individuals, come to these paintings, we should understand that the painting is asking questions of us just as we ask the painting itself to provide us with some answers, none of which Sam is willing to give. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that part of the process of looking at Sam's paintings is also being engaged by the question, not only the conditionality of life, but the questions of the meaning of life itself. Can we go to the next piece, which is a particularly strong and beautiful piece? And the reproduction on the screen is even more powerful, more delineated than the printout that I have next to me. Caroline, I'm going to ask you to begin if you're okay with that, and then we'll move on to others.
Well, I mean, the first thing that jumps out is it's some kind of maze. It's a visual maze. It's if you were in it, it's an actual maze. And then what jumps out second to me is the pawn right in the center. It's metal. It looks like a little bit different than the stone around it. So it stands out as a unique character. But what's so interesting about it is it's kind of bolted down. It can't really move from inside. What Sam pointed out during our practice event is that it's inside this question mark, and it's stuck in there, and it can't. It's kind of frustrating. It can't. To me, it has this frustration of it can't move from that place. And I mean that's where Sam uses visual. He uses material means to express something so fundamental spiritual experience that a lot of us do feel somewhat confused and stuck in our limited selves. And I think that's what this piece really stands out.
I will say that this is one of the paintings I'm most excited to see in person when I come to Boston. Like the technique here with the scraping versus the sort of really abstracted brushstrokes, and then the pulling of paint off the back and that smoothness of the water. You get these like, I'm looking forward to the sort of reaction that I'm going to feel physically to the artwork. So I don't know if anyone else is feeling that way, but there's all that excitement of the art historian when you love paint, that you just want to sort of there's that physical reaction to the piece. You just want to sort of touch it, which I won't, I promise them. But it's just going to be so cool. So I would encourage anyone on this webinar that can to go see it in person.
I love it. The nice thing about the gallery is occasionally we break the rules of museums, and you could actually touch it when you're here.
Don't tempt me.
Rusty?
I just wanted to add something. As I said before, I looked at my work of 60 years ago, and I have some drawings which are very close to this painting. And maybe ladies won't understand it as well as men, how wonderful it is when you are 90 to think subtly of yourself when you are 30, when you can do things that at my age are not so easy to create.
Well, I think, Sam, if there's a fountain of youth, it must be in your backyard. Rusty, I wanted your thoughts.
Several things. One is just as a general rule for Sam's paintings, I call it the Renaissance background. I know, Sam, you love the Renaissance painters, but the idea of the background to make the foreground far more poignant is brilliant. There's this foreverness that drifts into the background, like a castle in the sky, or like water that goes to the sea, flowing rivers, etc. But by it being there, what's in the foreground becomes monumental in a time-wise sort of way. And so it brings us very carefully into this foreground, which is a maze. And Sam uses mazes in a number of different ways in different paintings. The idea of how do you get in, how do you get out? I mean, I'm sure hiding in the various areas of Vilna that you and your mom had to do. So some of this has to be maybe dreams that your psychiatrist helped you with years ago. But it's where do we go in, where to go out? And for instance, as you pointed out, that the entrance and the exit to this maze are right next to each other. And the E, if you fall down the tunnel, is the end, is sort of down at the bottom. So the idea of mazes and what they represent, and they will represent different things to different people. If you're a young immigrant to this country that maybe came across a border, trying to figure out where is safety, where isn't, the if in that is, and the question mark that surrounds that if is just terribly poignant, because you go left, somehow you make it somewhere. You go right, you may die. So it's a wonderful model for all that we go through, and in many ways, all the decisions we make involve thought processes which are essentially mazes in a way, and therefore, once again, here's a visual example of something that happens intellectually or emotionally in us, and the irony of the poor pawn that's stuck there represents pretty much many times in our lives when we don't know which is the right direction.
I
Sam,
wanted,
I
I wanted
wanted you
just,
to.
excuse me, I wanted just to add something to what Rassi said about the landscape, about the horizon. These things I took from the Dutch, from Patineer, from Bruegel. This is the language of the universal landscape. It's not
Yeah.
a specific landscape. It's something that symbolizes the world is huge, is big, and we will never know it. But it's very interesting that the Dutch artists who never saw mountains but heard about their existence, they would in their studio take a few stones, put them together, and make of the landscape created by the still life of the stones a part of the universal landscape, because they felt that the universe is so big. And then it also allows me always to put the human being into knowing we are only a tiny part of something which is so much bigger than we are. So this may be when you reach an age in which you think that one day you will really return to where you came from, uh, makes the universal landscape much more important.
Yeah.
I think it's quite beautifully said. I'm going to read a quote of Brother Thomas's again and then move on to the next piece. Artworks would look to commemorate, give hope, echo and dignify suffering, rebalance and guide, assist self-knowledge and communication, expand horizons, and inspire appreciation. And I think, Sam, in so many ways, each of the points or words that Thomas has used all apply to virtually every painting that you have created. And I love the notion of assist self-knowledge, so that if people come to your works open to the questions through the images and through the way you paint, then their opportunity for personal understanding and growth is enhanced enormously. So if we can look at the next piece, speaking about a small person in the midst of everything else, we have at least one figure who showed up in these images. Just look at it for a minute. I love it. I love, and also that there are a number of paintings throughout the years where books have appeared, and clearly books are an important part of your life and my life, that we share so much through other people's perspectives.
Yes, I mean books allow us to live so many lives, because when we read books now, for instance, I'm completely taken over by the French Balzac of the 20th century, Simenon. Is a fantastic writer who was not appreciated because he wrote so many books. He was very, very prolific, about 200 novels, about 100 Maigret, and so on. So books allow us to share things, and besides that, I was hidden in the most crucial time in Vilnius before the Russian army arrived to liberate us, between books, hidden between books. We really lived in a labyrinth of books, corridors of books, caves of books, hundreds of thousands of books that were that were brought together in this convent. And I owe my life to the books. And this traveler here who will leave one day this little island is maybe me a few years later, is the same man who appears in another painting, which is called the One Man Island. It's is that traveler that I was incredibly lucky to be able to travel so much between one civilization and another civilization, and my St. Louis did not sink. My St. Louis brought me to other countries, made me discover world. I had a wonderful St. Louis.
Indeed, and I grew up near St. Louis. Let me ask, Rusty, if you have some thoughts about this, and then Alex.
Well, I think again, first of all, the books are obviously first and foremost in this painting, and books can represent all the wonderful things Sam just described and Bertie that you enjoy reading. They also are a part of your culture, and it's almost here the frustration of nobody's going to be able to take these books with them, so maybe you cannot take some of your culture. The Nazis were taking some of those books. Sam was hidden. They were up in the convent, but many of the most amazing books and wonderful books, the Germans stole, either destroyed them or took them away. So there's a sense of irony here that this man might get on the boat, but the likelihood that the books will ever make it on the boat or that the culture will go with him is questionable. And that's the dynamic so often in Sam's paintings, is even this little island that or this, whatever this little thing is that he's standing on, looks like he could collapse into the sea pretty much maybe before that boat comes in, or that boat may never come in. It may go by and leave this poor man standing there waiting. There are some ominous signs like an X on the cloth that hangs down from above. It's bluish in color, sort of often more typically the cloth on the lower part that's draped, also blue. This is the Israeli sort of blue, so there's a element of the Jewish culture that's brought into this to recognize that as being part of it. But again, there's a huge amount of tentativeness to this, and almost a feeling of this maybe starting to collapse almost. There's almost a sense of movement in it. But it is, to me, I mean, the if is painted on the red disc, and red often is not a good thing to have in Sam's paintings. And so there's a lot of things that say this may not go well. But again, it's a tension. He might make it onto that boat. It might not be the St. Louis. Sam might get to Israel in 48, but there's all this tentativeness that is not answered here. And the tension is what's captured so wonderfully.
I think it's helpful to also point out that in the foreground on the left, the box or the suitcase has an X on it, as the flag above does, often used as a symbol for being X'd out or death itself. But Alex?
I mean, for me, what's amazing about Sam's paintings is the reaction also to a contemporary moment. We're living in a time of great uncertainty for migrants, forced migrants, people who've immigrated legally, technically, as some people say, illegally. There's an uncertainty about the world at this moment in time that's beautifully reflected. I always think of books as this incredible symbol of humanity because they have authors who are telling a story of characters, of lives lived, of these experiences that we recognize ourselves in, or that allow us to learn of others. And the fact that they're all tied up and stacked in piles and almost like impossible to transport is reflect on them as people's intellect at this moment in time, and this refusal to learn of others, this acceptance of the erasure also of people's lives as they're being pulled from their home and deported to jails in countries where they have never been. There's all this contemporary ness here that is transcending of a specific moment in history. And I think that's why it speaks so much to our young viewers. I mean, they really relate, not having the length of your life, Sam, but they really relate their experiences of movement, of travel, of migration when they see these paintings. And some of them are able to speak beautifully of experiences in refugee camps, experiences of forced travel, of being in fear, and also having to leave behind family and past lives. So, I just always want to point out how contemporary Sam is as well.
Just to add to that, Alexandra, you have experienced so many young people who've come into the gallery there who are immigrants, new immigrants from the South, whether they come from Central South America. And the time we were there, I was so taken by how they see in this their travels, their unknowns, what they have faced, just as you're describing. So you've really been surrounded by that for the period of time the museum's been open there, I think.
Yeah. And the multi-generational public that we have, it's really wonderful to have people drop by the office and say, this is my reaction to this painting, and sometimes they look for validation in that, and I tell them, that's exactly what the purpose of the artwork is to trigger a reaction in the viewer and a conversation. So, relax and allow yourself to venture on that path. Like this guy, he has to allow himself to move away from this island, to build something out of the questions that are being asked of him.
All very important.
I just wanted to add something. I wanted to add something about books. And Alex speaking from Omaha, from the Bak Museum. When I was in Omaha, when there was my first exhibition, the one that was the first link that created afterwards the idea of the museum, the donation, and so forth, what moved me most, and what certainly inspired me, the idea that it was the right place to leave paintings of mine, was that in the class of creative writing, they were reading my book, Painted in Words, and they read a chapter about where I described in the camp the loss of my father. My father is smuggling me out from the camp and so on. And there was this big class. There were 2 classes or 3 classes together. And I was wondering what will these people from this place understand or feel or resonate with my work. But when they finished the reading and there was a pause, I was surrounded by students who wanted to tell me how much they felt themselves in this boy. And I looked at them, and they were mostly Latinos or Black, first generation of young people who were somehow privileged to be allowed to be the very first of their family's story to reach this education. And I suddenly realized that this was a place where the story of a boy from Vilna can resonate and speak to people who had very, very, very hard experiences of life. And this was a wonderful place. So these books, from these many books to the one book that I was able to create, but somehow it's all interrelated.
Yeah.
In a very important way. Let me just add, so that people will have a better sense, that Alexandra is the chief curator of the Samuel Bak Museum and Learning Center on the campus of the University of Nebraska in Omaha. And she and Hillary, who is the director of the museum, have created in a very short time some of the richest, most engaging and important programming using Sam's art in exactly the way and beyond our imagined way to engage people, young people, old people, in the questions that we've been spending time so far talking about. I also need to add an apology because we're barely halfway through the images, so we're going to move along. But I do want to say, Sam, that one of my favorite quotes is from Ludwig Lewison. When the Jews began calling themselves the people of the book, it meant they were no longer reading the book. And I think that your constant reminder of how important books are to open other worlds to our own spirit and to our own lives is so beautifully portrayed in that piece. So let's move on. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Caroline, is this the piece that you had thought you wanted to speak about and we hadn't included originally? And if not, go ahead anyway.
It is that piece. I picked this one as our last edition, not the last slide, but most recent, because so much what stood out in the practice that we did was that so much of what Sam makes is a window into his thoughts, a window into the self. And this one almost flips the script slightly, and I imagine it's kind of like you inside, your life inside, looking out of the body. That we have this pottery type lid, and of course it's obviously an hourglass with sand inside, and there's this big crack at the bottom. I think that can resonate with how a lot of us feel, that we are a body that is slowly decaying through time, and what we see from the inside, that's what Sam allows to come out on his paintings, and that's why I enjoyed this one so much.
Wonderful. Sam, I think you're due
Yes, I agree absolutely with that. What inspired me? Let's say I'm afraid always of the word inspired, but what moved me to break this is that although I know that my life is now, there's not much sand left in my life, but there are the children, there are the grandchildren, there is a certain continuation, there is family, there are mainly friends who understand my work, who understand me, with whom I have developed wonderful relationships. And all this, which is myself connected to the others, is the life which here remains living in this painting that surrounds the sand that is little by little dripping there with the life inside it. So life, a lot of life remains. And, I'm thinking of all the friends that I have lost that live in me. So there is something of life that goes on beyond our own person, where we still exist. And I'm not speaking of the fact that I am very privileged to leave after me a number of immobile images of myself.
I love it. We're going to move on. I encourage people, this recording will be available, and then you can use it and spend even more time on individual pieces. But each of the pieces offers such an extraordinary opportunity to engage with the kinds of questions we've been speaking about. So, Rusty, I'm going to ask you if you don't mind beginning with this one.
Sure. This is a very interesting painting of using the words. There's life, and life seems to be held up in some ways by the ropes that are attached to it, and they go up somewhere off the canvas. And there's always a question, is that a reference to some sort of divine intervention? Well, there's a somewhat pieced together rainbow with some color in it. Maybe there's something divine, something religious involved here, but certainly it is not protective. Some question would be whether it's oppressive. And I think that's the issue for me of this painting. What really is happening here? Sam titled this Uplifted, but Sam's titles can often be ironic, and one has to be careful about these titles, because the question is, as you see love and all its ribbons and movement and softness, is that really lifting up this very harsh looking or heavy looking rainbow dominated life? Or is life getting ready to be lowered down and crush love into that sea below it? The title says uplifted, and so one wants to believe that love is sustaining life in some way. Hope is a little tiny piece of offering, not easily seen in there. So hope doesn't, in this particular piece, carry all that much sway. It's sort of tucked in there in life somewhere. But I will mention this, and I'm done with this. But remember that life is a noun. It is not a verb. It cannot be a verb. If you want to make life a verb, you have to go to live. But hope and love are both nouns and verbs. So you can love someone or you can have love. You can hope or you can have hope. You have life, therefore, as a word among these three is, to me, sort of a solid entity. You can't make it do something. It is something. Whereas these other words, these other two words that we work with, just for fun, when you look at these words in juxtaposition, as I said before, there's something interesting about that.
I'm very appreciative of having a grammarian with us as well. And I just wanted to have Alex's thoughts, and then we'll move on.
So Sam might not like this, but one of the reasons I was taken with this particular work was because of the tension that exists in Fragonard's swing painting, where you have all these swirls of white and pink that come forth to celebrate this sort of illicit love affair that's taking place. And I see a lot of, Fragonard-like brushstrokes within Sam's work. The thickness of the paint and this vivacity of the paint and the joy of the painter getting pigment on canvas. But there's a dark side to that painting that's not in the work. It's what is happening at that moment in time in pre-revolutionary France, where the aristocracy is living this amazing life of luxury while people are suffering around it. And so these beautiful ribbons that are forming the word love that may or may not be uplifting or being crushed slowly by this lowering scale that's coming down. You get that duality that exists within that painting, the sort of joy and effervescence of love versus the realities of life, and how life can crush love, but also how love can make a world seem better. And that freedom that the painter has to question both. So here we go back to Sam as the painter of questions, who's asking us, what holds up your life, what gives you hope, what weighs it down. And then the other thing I love about this painting is the reappearance of the invisible puppeteer, because there's always this what's beyond the canvas question that I struggle with. This idea of these tense ropes, and where is the marionette player? Who's controlling it? Who's going to be lowering this? And that unpredictability and that inability for us to know that makes us so uncomfortable. I was reading this article about worrying, and it said worrying is what happens as a result of your planning. Because you're worrying about a situation that you've created in your mind that may or may not come to pass. And so,
love it.
That worrying of the figure, who's the figure? How's the situation been created, and why is it being held in such a way? So those are my thoughts on this one.
I love it. I love it. The notion of worrying as a result of our planning is one of the favorite activities of somebody I'm married to. Let's go to the next piece, please. Sam, you should speak briefly about this. This is another of the
Yeah, this is another one of the works created on the digital tablet with the Procreate system, and I very much tried to create the sense of watercolor, and then I touched it up with just a few touches of gouache, and was very happy with the sense of lightness and the solidity of hope um, being the base for a life that is not always very clearly understood or or seen even. Um, that's briefly what I can say about that.
I think it's very helpful to have that perspective as we finally go to the last piece. And I want to accompany it with one further quote, Sam, that seems to me so appropriate. Perhaps we are made to look back just for the experience of being amazed as much by what we have done as by what we can still do. And I think in so many ways, even you are a little bit amazed by what you have continued to be able to do to generate extraordinary works of art. And it comes out of your own personal need to ask the questions of what is life? What can we do in relation to the conditionality of life to somehow live fully for others and for ourselves. And that is, from my perspective and from the gallery's perspective, an enormous privilege to have been part of that process over only 58 years. So
Yeah.
we should continue as best we can. And
Yeah, very important, the best we can. And I must say that for me, sorry, Bernie, for having interrupted, but the
no.
best we can, for me to do the best I can in the condition of today, when my hand is not as stable as it used to be, when I have to find a way of supporting it, when my vision is not as very good and I have to take off my glasses and put on my glasses and so on. But the important thing is not to have pity for oneself, not to have Rahmanas, is just to say, okay, I have these limitations. Let me see how it can be overcome. And when I see the works that I have managed somehow to accomplish, I have this strange reassurance. I'm still there. And I was able to overcome a certain number of difficulties and do things which can hold next to things that I did so many years ago. So, I mean, this is something that also these paintings convey and mainly reassure me personally. This is what I gained from them.
Absolutely beautifully said. Alex?
I love this idea of overcoming. For me, this painting is absolutely seminal in this body of work because it's mentally overcoming, it's physically overcoming, finding the exit that will allow one to live a life if one dares go through this hole in the wall. If this hole in the wall is real too, because we have all the trickery of the painter here that can beautifully paint on a wall an exit and say like this is the dream of the exit that happens. But then there's this ramp in the background that would allow someone to climb out of this enclosure. But Sam, you might find frustration with taking on the glasses, taking off the glasses, with holding the hand, but it gives a different dimension to your painting. It places it in this moment in time because the brushstroke changes over the course of your career in ways that are incredibly satisfying. When I get to look at the catalog raisonné and see this evolution of a painter throughout his life and what interests him more, like the playing with abstract fields within a figurative painting, there's something really gorgeous at this moment in time about your brushwork. And so I don't want you to feel like you had to paint like you were painting in the 70s in any way, right at this moment in time. This is the textures within your work are really exciting. The blends of paint, the layering, the brushwork versus the scraping. They're incredibly satisfying pieces to look at from a technical perspective. So, keep the glasses coming on and off and getting mad at your hand perhaps, but I will tell you as the viewer, it's really excellent. So don't be mad.
I love that, because I think the notion of more contemporary art has always been look at the surfaces and what do the surfaces generate. And Alex, what you're referring to, and I'm looking at a painting on my wall here from 1968, where everything's very meticulous and very controlled, and then looking at some of the recent pieces that have an implicit energy in it and vitality that didn't exist in the more perfect ones along the way. So I thank you for pointing that out. Rusty?
I would just reiterate, sorry. For me, Sam's spirit is what goes into his work. And Sam will tell you, he starts to paint and there's something in him that gets put on the canvas eventually, or in the other drawings that happen, and whatever medium he works with, there's a need to put something that's inside of him into the visual, and he continues to do that. Whether it's fine painted, I have one of the most beautiful paintings that Sam did with the one hair brush almost. Every leaf is detailed. But the spiritual aspect or emotional aspect, the impact of this work continues to be just as powerful with different approaches. And that's because what Sam wants to do and what you continue to do is to get what's inside of you onto something that we can all share visually. And in this, again, although there's an exit sign, there's always a question: is that is that exiting life? If you leave this, is this the safe place inside? And if you go outside, it's not, or is that the way to freedom? And somehow you need to knock down the wall. You need to make a hole. You need to disrupt in order to move forward. And you can look at it, either way, and there is no answer. But there's always the question: it's like Kafka's Before the Door, right? Do I go through the door? There's a door there, there's a window there, there's an exit there, and life is all about those decisions. And so life is sort of scattered here in the interior, sort of pieced back together. This is not some well-structured, defined life. This is maybe an essence. And what's on the other side of the wall, even though there's an exit mark there, exit's another way that we leave the world, right? You're exiting this world. So there's a lot of question here, but the tension, the emotion of making that decision, the difficulty that can be presented is captured wonderfully. Forget whatever the technique change may be, the emotion of this painting is powerful.
Finally, Caroline?
This piece just hits you in the face. This piece, you're not looking at it, you're inside it. It's that giant wall that comes around, and it just hovers over you there on the right-hand side. And it begs the question, do you stay or do you go? And I just been turning that in my head. I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? I think it's disheveled inside, and there's this beautiful light on the outside, but there's no known. You don't see the ground. Sam hasn't given the answer. He's painted a question for sure. And my vote is to go out of that. You can go through that narrow passage, that there's such destruction on the inside of this place that was once beautiful and once secure. Walls represent the security, but it is what's on the other side, I think, that begs that question of hope. What you can go ahead and try it. It's all we have is to hope and to try.
Wonderful.
Bernie, might be Sam at 92 sort of wondering what's on that other side over there. Be careful.
Yeah, you are right. You are right. But I'm not careful. I'm not, and Bernie isn't careful. When Bernie refused a certain painting, a certain loan, he wasn't very careful because the
Yes.
police might have been standing there at the door. But anyway, what I wanted to say in this painting also, I chose a shape that makes you maybe think of the Colosseum. And when there is a way of getting out from the Colosseum, the word exit seems to be written in blood,
Yeah.
seems to be written with a hand that is full of blood because it's running. So it's not by mistake or technical accident that these things happen. They are kind of calculated. So there is a certain degree of calculation of what it's in this kind of narrative art that I'm creating. I'm almost like a playwright. I put in all kinds of elements, knowing that they will maybe trigger certain conscious or even subconscious reactions. So it's narrative art, which is fantastic because now it exists and it's kind of legitimized. But when I was young, narrative art was forbidden. I mean, whenever you tried to tell something with a painting, it was considered to be an illustration. It was considered to be non-art. So at a certain point, I started it merely as a provocation, and then here I am, and I'm speaking, and people accept it, and people tell me what I have been doing, and tell me sometimes more than what I was conscious of. So it is wonderful to have feedbacks of this kind, and somehow be understood. Um, and I was very, very lucky, I know, with you four who are on the screen, and then I must, of course, remind Larry Langer, who was a wonderful voice speaking of my art, and some others. So here I am, still preparing to do some paintings. Maybe now paintings finally for myself and not for others. Who knows? We will see. We will see.
So it's
Yeah,
wonderful that you're going to end with a question mark, that you're
yeah.
questioning yourself. But I just
Oh,
wanted
absolutely.
to conclude
Absolutely.
with a number of just brief thoughts, one of which is that there is a full e-catalog, and when the recording is available, we will add the e-catalog, so those of you who do not have it can access this, and in the future it will be available. And finally, Sam, just simply I say thank you to you for a pretty good ride for 58 years of friendship and of the joy of being able to both work with you and alongside you to make sure that what you have done and created will continue in the world as sometimes art is intended, which is to add something to the life of humanity. So a real privilege, everyone, to be engaged with the question of life, even if it was on the condition that if exists. Thank you for
Bernie?
joining us. Yes, sir.
Bernie, just briefly, I was just had the pleasure of visiting Houston, and there is a much smaller collection of Sam's work at the Holocaust Museum in Houston. And again, it's a striking place to visit it. Anybody who has the opportunity to go to Houston, it's a much smaller gallery. It's not on the scale of what Omaha will be, but it's a very quiet, introspective sort of gallery that you can visit, as well as the Holocaust Museum there, and see Sam's work in a very wonderful environment, introspective environment that you can sit and appreciate not only modern paintings but some of Sam's older work. So it's well worthwhile if anybody gets to Houston.
Sounds good. Everyone, thank you for your time. Thank all the panelists, and especially Sam. Thank you.